Hello Americans. Today is October 28th, a new day with improvements of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Let's take a look at all the events that led to the crisis. After December 19th of 1960, when Cuba openly aligned itself with the Soviet Union, today, on the 22nd of October, we have reached a new crisis. Let's hear from Russell Rivers about the proceedings of our relationship with Cuba.
Hello, my name is Russell, and as you can see, the crew is at the presidential address regarding the Cuban Missile Crisis. And here we have President Kennedy getting ready for the address. And now we have Senator Kenneth Keating with us. What's the situation, Senator?
Give me some skin! On August 31, I insisted that there were some missile installation in Cuba. On October 14th, our YouTube reporter took photographs that reported missile sites over West Cuba. Today, the Congress was shown those photographs.
Okay, thanks.
As President Kennedy addressed, this is perhaps the first incident where mutually assured destruction may be assured. Now let's enter a short commercial break. If you were to remember the events from yesterday, the Organization of American States approved the quarantine against Cuba. Here's the broadcast of President Kennedy's speech.
It shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile fired from Cuba in any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack of the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliation response upon the Soviet Union.
We've just received footage from the US ships from the quarantine line, from your favorite newscaster, Russell Rivers.
There's a fleet lined up at the quarantine line, and things do not seem to go well, with both sides refusing to back down. We have Admiral Anderson with us at the naval reception room. What's the situation, Admiral?
A blockade was set up 800 miles from Cuba as the negotiation between the United States and the USSR continued. A blockade was chosen as a full-scale invasion is out of the question.
However, President Kennedy had decided late night yesterday to give more time to Khrushchev and pulled the quarantine line back to 500 miles. Back to the present. A newsletter from Khrushchev arrived yesterday proposing the public trade of Soviet missiles in Cuba for the US missiles in Turkey. Kennedy replies by saying that the United States will not invade Cuba if missiles are removed. Although it seems like an improvement, it is far from over. Wait, we're receiving a call with an update on the situation. Wonderful! Good morning, America! Today is a new day and we must all celebrate for the end of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Khrushchev had just announced over Radio Moscow that the missiles will be removed from Cuba. Remember this day, Americans, October 28, 1962, the end of the Cuban Missile Crisis.
And Russell, thanks.
Hello America, and welcome to The Rivers Show with the one and only Russell Rivers.
And I'm the only river you cannot cross.
And I'm your host, Neil Fletch. And today, as well as Russell Rivers, we also have other experts from the field to analyze the situation, the Cuban Missile Crisis that happened these past 14 days.
First of all, let's welcome the director of the National Photographic Interpretation Center, who analyzed the Hazer flight, Mr. Arthur Lundell.
Hello, America!
So, tell me, Arthur, what were your first reactions when you saw these photos?
These were my exact words. If there was ever a time I want to be right in my life, this is it. At first, we glanced at what we thought was Cuba having surface-to-air missiles. However, after close inspection, it was revealed that it was 6 larger missiles. It seems that presidential engagement was inevitable.
Thank you, Mr. Arthur Lundell.
My pleasure.
And now let's welcome our next guest, the National Security Advisor, McGeorge Bundy. It says here that you were the one who informed President Kennedy. When was this?
It was of the morning of October 16th. I informed President Kennedy while he was still in his pajamas in the morning. This is a true story. We had found hard photographic evidence of the Russians hosting missiles in Cuba.
And what was his reactions to these news?
What reaction? First, he inspected the photos himself, and although the photos showed no evidence of the missiles being operational or had nuclear warheads. Come on, this is the Soviets we're talking about. They would soon be operational anyways.
Well, generally, in times of crisis, a committee is established to counter the involved crisis.
The group that was installed was called EXCOMM. It's EXCOMM, or the Executive Committee of National Security Council.
And what course of action did they take?
As it was, we assumed the nuclear warheads were not yet on the island. So our immediate course of action was to stop them from coming to Cuba. We did not know there were already some warheads on Cuba. We wanted to resolve it diplomatically with the Russians. Act tough, but with no armed confrontation.
Thank you, Mr. Bundy. By Wednesday, a day after President Kennedy was informed, there was no straightforward course of action. The evil communists did not know if we knew of the missiles, so what do you think of this, Russell?
I think the more important aspect was if the public were to know, mass panics would follow. Things seemed worse when intermediate range missiles were found on the 17th. To tell or not to tell was the question, and not to tell was the answer at the time.
The following day resulted in a meeting with Gromyko, if that's how you say it, talking about Cuba. Gromyko insisted that they were but assisting the growth of Cuba.
What a load of garbage. The EXCOMM maybe should have just gone ahead with their planned airstrike if it didn't involve wiping Cuba off the world map.
Right on. Next we have on regarding the decision. Once again we have Senator Keating.
Give me some skin!
I'm sure we all know President Kennedy's decision, but we'd like to hear it from you, Senator.
Essentially, the president made up his decision in his 4 days of isolation. By the time he was going to make a public announcement at 7 p.m., 300 ships had already set sail and DEFCON had already targeted Cuba and Russia ready to strike.
I see, but what exactly is the DEFCON?
It meant defensive readiness condition. There were 5 levels of DEFCON at the time, we were already at level 3, the 1 being the most severe.
It's to our understanding that Kennedy made these initial steps.
Yes, indeed.
First, to halt this offensive build-up, a strict quarantine of all military equipment under shipment to Cuba is being initiated. To quote some excerpts, I have directed the continued and increased close surveillance and its military build-up.
It shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile far from Cuba in any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack of the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliation response upon the Soviet Union.
I take it the Soviets did not take well to this information.
No, not at all. Khrushchev records that all the ships were not to stop on course and that Castro mobilized all of Cuba's military.
So it seemed like a stalemate with the threat of mutually assured destruction.
You could say that over the next few days there were conflicts with the Soviet Union and our home front.
Let's start with the home front then.
I prefer to do them at the same time, since problems in the home front arise when there were problems with the Soviets. Sorry, let me get it out of my notes. I need to make sure my points are in order. 2 days after the speech, DEFCON was rated 2. Many of the public believed the face-saving approach would be of interest, but if the missiles were removed from Cuba and from Turkey, both the Soviets interpreted the exchange as what Kennedy proposed.
How was the shipments in the Atlantic coming along by now?
Oh yes, the Merculine. It was a Lebanese freighter which the warheads were shipped on. It was to be boarded if they breached the 500-mile quarantine.
Thank you, Senator Keating.
My pleasure.
Next up, let's welcome Robert McNamara, the Secretary of Defense, to join us. Hello, Mr. McNamara.
Hello.
So I heard the 27th was the word.
No doubt about that. I believe that I would not see another Saturday night. Another of our U-2s were shot down on the course over to Russia, and Khrushchev sent a demanding letter. A mistake from a U-2 fighter almost cost us the nation. It got close to Soviet territory when it flew close to Alaska because he flew off course. Fortunately, we were able to recall it before our backup and the Soviets' interception crew met each other.
Tell us more about the letter.
So there was a letter that Khrushchev sent us. It was a demanding letter telling us to remove our missiles, our Jupiter missiles in Turkey, with their missiles in Cuba. It was not a good deal because the placement of the Jupiter missiles was significantly better than the Cuban missiles. We responded not to this letter, but a previous one, where we agreed to remove the quarantine line and not invade Cuba.
And that was the end.
Yes, that was the end. Khrushchev agreed over Radio Moscow to unman the missiles by Sunday. Looks like there were a lot of weekends to come.
Thank you, Mr. McNamara. And there you have it, Americans, with a genius from our government and our president. It seems that we've dodged a bullet, or rather a few nuclear exchanges. And that is the conclusion to the Cuban Missile Crisis.
And thank you for watching the River Show, and we'll see you next time.
I'd prefer to do them at the same time. I'd prefer to do them at the same time. Since problem in the home front arise when there were problems with the Soviets. I'd prefer to do them at the same time. Since
My name's Cedric Keating, and give me some skin, boy!